Hi, welcome to part 3 out of 6 pertaining to reproduction. So let's jump straight into it, guys. So before we move any further, I had mentioned hormones already. Now, at the end of the day, a hormone is a chemical, and it basically tells your body to do something. And here are just some examples, right? There are a lot of different types of hormones in your body, these special chemicals, and some of the things they can tell your body what to do. One example, it can tell you when to grow and when to stop growing. That's just one example. Now, in humans and other animals, right? Hormones are produced in glands. And we're going to investigate where these glands can be found around the body. And they release the hormones. The glands, once they produce the hormones, they send it into our blood. And as you all know, the blood flows around our body via the circulatory system, using our heart, veins, and arteries and capillaries. The hormones can be sent to different parts of the body. So the glands that make the hormones, right? All the glands together, the name of that system is called your endocrine system. But anyway, let's have a look at the endocrine system on the next slide. So here's the human body, and there are different glands found all over the body. At the front of your head, right, or the front of your brain, there's this gland called the pituitary gland. In your neck, there's a special gland called the thyroid. Just above your kidneys, there's a special gland called the adrenal gland. Behind, but somewhere around your stomach, right now, kind of like behind, wedged behind your stomach, is a gland, but not a gland, an organ called the pancreas, right? So I kind of draw that bar there, right? The adrenal gland is the kind of pinkish one on top of the kidneys. The bright red one here is the pancreas. And in women, right, there's something called the ovaries, which we mentioned already, right? And in men, it have the testes, right? I don't have the testes over here. Now, all of these glands form part of the endocrine system. The thyroid produces a lot of hormones, the adrenal gland. There are a lot of different types of hormones created in all of these glands. I'm not going to discuss all of them today. I'm only going to discuss the ones that pertain to the slides that are coming up, and more specifically deal with the reproductive system or have some effect on the reproductive system. So in the pituitary gland, you're going to be focusing on two hormones created by this gland, which is at the front of your brain. One called the follicle stimulating hormone, which we shall abbreviate to FSH, and the other one called luteinizing hormone. Yes, it's a very hard word to produce. It could probably give you a headache. But we will abbreviate it to the LH hormone. In the ovaries, right? We're not going to be discussing the testes today, right? In the ovaries, which are found in women only, right? There are two hormones that are created. Estrogen, remember the O is silent, and progesterone. Now, we had briefly encountered these two hormones already. Now, it's very important that you remember where it is created, right? So that's why I have these boxes here and these arrows, because you will get questions on it in the exam. Let's move on to the next slide. So we're going to start with the menstrual cycle. So the menstrual cycle, it's basically the cycle where the female reproductive system prepares itself to hopefully prepare its eggs so it can be fertilized. Now you have to keep in mind, when the female reproductive system produces an egg, not all the time it will come in contact with sperm to be fertilized. So sometimes eggs are fertilized and sometimes eggs are not fertilized. The menstrual cycle obviously is affected by the fact that if fertilization occurs, the cycle will behave a certain way. And of course, if it's not fertilized, it will behave well, not a slightly different way, but a different way. So the menstrual cycle, it lasts on average, keyword is average here, 28 days, which is about a month. So let's go through the cycle here. The cycle actually starts where it finishes off. And it's going to start at a kind of sad point. I like to think of it as a sad point. The first step or the first phase in the menstrual cycle is called menstruation. Let me explain what that is now and why I consider this the sad part of the cycle. Remember, the ovaries would have produced an egg. The egg will do what now? Flow through. Let me just move this to the side here. Something's blocking the view, right? The egg produced in the ovary is going to flow through the fallopian tubes. And of course, sometimes the egg will be fertilized by a sperm and sometimes it would not. We're going to assume that the egg went all the way through the fallopian tubes and it was not fertilized. So that's why I consider it sad, because in a case like this, the female reproductive system is not expecting a baby because the egg was not fertilized. So at this part of the cycle, this is the starting point here. Since it's not expecting a baby, the uterus sheds. Remember, the walls of the uterus would have been moderately thick, not extremely thick. If the egg was fertilized, then the walls of the uterus would have been very, very thick. But since there's no child on its way, no baby on its way, the uterus, it's moderately thick, not too thick, but it begins to shed, and the uterus walls along with the egg gets flushed out of the female reproductive system via the vagina. Okay, so that's phase one. But the female reproductive system is not giving up. It wants a baby. So what the vagina does, what the female reproductive system does after, it begins to thicken back the lining. Remember, the uterus just lost its lining. So it says, all right, I'm going to build back the lining or the walls in the uterus. I'm not giving up. Then the ovaries begin to develop another egg. And eventually, it will release back the egg into the fallopian tubes, right? So that's ovulation, right? Ovulation, it's more specifically means that an egg was developed in the ovary and it got released. The releasing of the egg into the fallopian tubes is called ovulation. All right, but keep in mind, to develop an egg in the ovary takes some time. It doesn't happen in one day. It actually takes on average 14 days to start creating the egg and to eject it out into the fallopian tubes. Now, step 4, the maintenance of the lining. Remember the uterus, in part 2 here, in step 2, the uterus begin to well, what did it begin to do? It began to become thicker, right? When it reaches a certain thickness, it maintains that thickness. It's on medium thickness. Whether the uterus walls gets more thick, like thicker than medium, like it gets super thick, depends on whether the egg gets fertilized or not. If the egg were to get fertilized, then in step 4, the uterus walls will continue to get thicker and thicker and thicker. If the egg is not fertilized, then it goes back to step 1, and the whole process starts over again. All right? So just some things to note, right? In step 2, for the uterus to begin to thicken back itself, right? So it can go back to medium thickness, the hormone estrogen tells the body to do that, right? And remember where estrogen is created. Is estrogen created in the pituitary gland, or is it created in the ovary? The answer is the ovary, right? Ovulation. Remember, when the egg is fully developed in the ovary now, and it's time to kick it out, how does the ovary know it's time to kick out the egg into the fallopian tubes? Well, the hormone LH, right? The one I'm not going to try to pronounce again because I don't want a headache, right? The LH hormone, which is produced in your pituitary gland, which is in the front of your brain, that hormone tells the ovary it's time to kick out the egg. And then progesterone, right, which is also created in the pituitary gland, right? Progesterone tells your body whether to make the uterus lining even thicker, which means only when the egg is fertilized, then your body will start to produce a lot of this hormone, because this hormone will make the uterus walls even thicker than normal, because now it expects a baby, right? So you have a lot to take down on this slide. Let's go to the next slide, right? Obviously, you guys know you can pause the video and whatnot, right? So this here is an average. Remember, the menstrual cycle has 4 stages. On average, and I have to say this word average because not all women are the same, right? This is just a rough average. The menstruation phase usually lasts around 5 days. After that, the follicular stage. This is the stage where the uterus just have it. Remember, it just lost its lining walls in the first stage, right? In the menstruation stage. So the follicular phase now is where it slowly starts to build up the walls in the uterus, so it can go back to being normal. Then the ovulation stage. This stage is where the egg is basically almost developed or developed, and it's getting ready to kick out the egg from the ovary into the fallopian tubes, right? So it has between day 12 to 16 ovulation can happen in any one of these days. On average, it usually happens on day 14 most of the times, right? And then after the luteal phase, well, this is a kind of iffy phase, right? Remember, this phase now, the purple phase, has 2 different scenarios. Remember, it's either that egg is going to be fertilized or not fertilized. So the luteal phase has 2 outcomes, right? It's either the wall lining continues to grow to accommodate a future baby, or the egg is not fertilized, and then it slowly reverts back to losing the wall lining. So the whole process can restart, right? My advice, memorize this chart and the exact amount of days, please. for those who are doing HSB, they love, I mean, they will just give, like, if you go through your past papers, I can't stress the amount of questions you're going to get on the menstrual cycle. In people who are doing integrated science, you are not going to get any detailed questions on the menstrual cycle, right? But the HSB people, please prepare yourself for a ton of questions on this topic in the exam. So let's move on. So let's have a look at the how the egg is developed, the different stages of the egg. So what we're going to do now, well, we're going to zoom in on the ovary, right? And so we're going to zoom in here. And inside the ovary, you're going to see something like an egg slowly that starts from small, right? And it's going to grow larger and larger and larger. The name of the hormone that tells the ovary that, hey, you need to start creating an egg now. The name of that hormone that starts the process is your follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. Now, at first glance, you are going to think that this whole thing that I am circling is the egg. That is not the egg, right? Right? And the reason I have to specify that is, like, a lot of students think in this diagram, what I just circled was the egg. It's not the egg. Instead, the bigger circle, the outer part, is something called your follicle. Your follicle is like an incubator. It's like the housing around the egg. In fact, the egg that is now starting to develop is just a small dot inside the follicle. So if you notice now, as we go this way, the dot in the middle is growing. So the egg is getting larger inside the follicle. So the follicle is like protecting the growing egg inside. And of course, as we go this way, the egg gets larger and larger inside the follicle. Then, close to day 14, right? Ovulation will happen. Remember the name of the hormone that tells the ovary that it's time to kick out the egg? It's LH, the LH hormone. So clearly the LH hormone has kicked in, and the egg inside the follicle gets kicked out. The follicle does not get kicked out. Only the egg inside the follicle gets kicked out. And of course, this egg here, this poor egg, just got evicted. And of course, he goes into the fallopian tubes, hopefully to meet a sperm, right? So fertilization can happen. And after fertilization happens, a zygote can form. The zygote can grow and then get implanted in the walls of the uterus. But anyway, if the egg gets kicked out, then what's left behind? Only the follicle is left behind. So the empty follicle, not useless, it's not useless, sir. A lot of people think the follicle is going to be useless, like, because his job is done. His job was to house the egg. But that's not true. The empty follicle now develops into something called a corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum produces progesterone. Now, here's the thing. Remember, your body always knows what's going on inside of it. Let me ask you guys a question, right? If this egg were to get fertilized, like a sperm were to fuse with it, the corpus luteum produces progesterone. Do you think that corpus luteum, who has the potential to produce progesterone, do you think it will produce lots of progesterone? What do you think? The answer is yes. Because remember, if fertilization happens here, the uterus needs progesterone to grow its walls. The progesterone encourages or tells the uterus, hey, grow the wall. Fertilization has happened. A baby is coming soon. But if no fertilization were to happen, the corpus luteum does not need to produce progesterone. Why would it produce progesterone? There's no baby on its way. So the corpus luteum basically dies. And of course, when it dies, no progesterone can be produced. And of course, if no progesterone is going to be produced, then the walls are not going to grow, and then a uterus is eventually going to shed and restart the cycle over again. All right, you guys know what to do. Pause the video, take down everything on the screen. Let's go. Right, so let's get to this. This looks scary. And the first time I had to learn this, I was so scared. This was terrible. I remember the first time I saw this. So let's have a good look at this diagram here before we go into this all of this scary how you call it? This scary text on the side there. Right? I'm gonna move aside some stuff here. All right. So it starts off at day 1. We have a little chart here, and it ends at day 28. So what's going to happen? This thickness here, this diagram, it basically represents the uterus wall. So sometimes the uterus wall is thick, and sometimes the uterus wall is thin. All right, so that's the first thing you have to notice about that diagram. So on day 1, right, in this particular diagram, if you will notice that the wall has just went from thick to thin. The reason for that is, remember, that's a sad part of the story. The uterus, which was moderately thick, the egg was not fertilized. Okay, so it's time to shed. So the walls, along with the egg, gets shed. So the walls get thinner. So around this time now, well, since the egg was not fertilized, you look at the top here too, right? The body says, all right, let's not give up. Let's start producing another egg. So at the beginning of the cycle, inside the ovary, an egg inside the follicle begins to develop. But remember, the egg is still inside the ovary, now starting to develop. So as time goes by, you notice the egg gets more and more developed. And look at this point here, ovulation. Ovulation is when the ovary says, all right, the egg is mature enough. Let's kick out the egg into the fallopian tubes. So the egg gets kicked out into the fallopian tubes. You all notice if you line it up here, ovulation occurs close to day 14. Remember, ovulation doesn't always occur at day 14. It always occurs somewhere around here, right? In this region over here. It's an average. Everybody's body is different, right? And of course, the corpus luteum stays inside the ovary and it waits. Remember, the corpus luteum produces progesterone. The progesterone determines whether the lining of the wall is going to get thicker or not to accommodate a future baby. So the corpus luteum is basically keeping an eye on things. He's keeping an eye on that egg and waiting for it to be fertilized or waiting on news that it has not been fertilized. Right? If you notice in this diagram, the walls are consistently getting what? Thicker and thicker and thicker. Because the corpus luteum, it's hoping at this point in time that the egg gets what? Fertilized. But you'll notice something happen after. After a while, it begins to drop down. So the wall begins to what? Become thinner. What do you all think happened in this scenario? Did the egg get fertilized? The obvious answer is no for this diagram, because if the egg had really gotten fertilized, at no point the wall will have gotten thinner. In fact, it would have just keep rising and rising and rising because it's expecting a baby, so the uterus wall just gets thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker, and the corpus luteum would not die. It would not fade away. It would remain alive to keep producing progesterone, to keep that lining growing. Okay, so in this diagram, unfortunately, no fertilization happened. So some things to note over here now, right? I know some of you guys are trying to read here and the thing is blocking the text here. Oh, yeah. Give me a few seconds. This is one of those things that take a little while to, to explain here. Right. So, and you all will notice something here. In the diagram too, the progesterone levels begin to drop, meaning that what? No fertilization occurred. One thing to note is that from this chart here, you notice at ovulation, there's a spike. Look at the blue line here. This blue line represents the amount of LH hormone. At ovulation, you notice there's a spike in the LH hormone. The LH hormone drastically increases. Remember, we said, well, I said, the LH hormone is the one that tells the ovary to what? Kick out the egg, right? So anytime ovulation is happening, right, you will notice that there's a spike in the LH hormone. There's also a spike in the FSH hormone, but it's not a huge spike. It's a very, very, very what? Small spike, okay? I just want to point out, right? Remember, the estrogen does what, right? The estrogen helps the uterus repair the walls, right? But progesterone also does that, right? But in a different way. The estrogen, it's more effective in the first half of the menstrual cycle. So when the uterus now sheds, it depends on the estrogen to slowly build back the walls of what? The uterus. And then after, progesterone jumps in, to help out the thickening of the wall. But when fertilization happens, remember, progesterone is going to take preference here. He's going to be the main hormone now. And if fertilization were to happen, this graph will not drop. The progesterone would just keep rising and rising and rising. Okay. So I just wanted to point that out now. It's easy to forget that estrogen also helps build back the wall, but progesterone, it also helps build the wall also. Both of them are involved in it. Here's what I need you guys to do now. Everything that I just discussed, I have it in a flow chart here. I want you all to give this a read. When you reach this area here, remember, two things can happen. It's either fertilization can happen or no fertilization can happen. I guarantee you, when you read that, it will match up to exactly what I said. And when you are finished, I want you to take your time and draw everything and write everything on this slide. Okay? You will not regret investing a lot of time in memorizing this slide, right? Let's move on, right? Sorry I took so long on this slide, right? Now, here's one thing to remember, right? A lot of people think that as soon as there is a spike in the LH hormone, it kicks out the egg immediately. That's not true. When there's a spike in the LH, this hormone is very slow. When the LH spikes, the ovary just like what watches the LH hormone, and he moves very, very slow to evict or throw out the egg. In fact, after the spike, right, it usually takes between 24 and 36 hours to kick out the egg, right? So you could say that the ovary is very, very lazy at reacting to the LH hormone. All right. So, and I've seen this question come in the exam already. They ask like on average, how long does it take for the egg to be ejected out of the egg after there's a spike in the LH hormone? Okay, guys. So let's see what the next slide is about. Right, and we're at the end of part 3. So very soon I will be making part 4 out of 6. Take care, guys. Have a good one.